really excited to be talking to Erik Doc Anderson, who is an ADHD coach who specializes in helping people become the hero of their own story. Doc is an ADHDer who also has cerebral palsy. And he learned early how damaging limiting stories can be to ourselves and to others. He realized he could either listen to those stories and live in a very small world, or rewrite them and live in a much larger one. And so as a result, he's done impossible things, the kinds of things that many other people only dream of doing. And he shows other people that they can do impossible things too. And one of the reasons that I wanted to chat with him is because I recently learned that a lot of women discover that they may have undiagnosed ADHD when they hit menopause, because some of the symptoms of menopause are forgetfulness, cognition problems, memory problems, and it may be one thing to think it's menopause, but some women think, oh my gosh, what's going on here? Do I have undiagnosed ADHD? And then for women who have been living with an ADHD diagnosis, they've managed to get to this point. They've got systems and coping mechanisms, and then menopause hits, and it's like a double whammy. So I wanted to talk with somebody who knows about this, and Doc, you're the man here, who can talk about some of these. Why is it that women are less or their diagnosis of women is
problematic?
Underdiagnosed?
Yeah, it is. And there's a number of reasons for that. And it goes back to schools, it goes back to institutions and systems. And many of these systems are designed by and for men. In school, the diagnosis of ADHD is often because a teacher is frustrated with a boy that is bouncing off the walls, as opposed to many women who their ADHD is a different type that is more internal. And so they don't tend to be the troublemakers. So their ADHD is different as a result. Some of the markers that go with ADHD are seen, but the ADHD itself is often not addressed. And then we have the problem that so much of our medical and therapy and care institutions still view ADHD as a kid thing. But adult ADHD is a very real thing, and adult ADHD is much different than what it is when we were children.
Okay, yeah.
And by the way, this is my wife, Andrea.
I'm so sorry.
Yes. No worries.
We're kind of a set, and I married above my species.
I read recently, it may have been an article by William Dodson, who is a doctor who publishes a lot on ADHD, talking about that with adult women, there is almost never the stereotypical hyperactivity, the external hyperactivity, and it is present much less with girls as well, or at least in a different form. With girls, it will more often show as impulsivity rather than the bouncing off the walls that we think of as hyperactivity. And those impulsivity things will manifest as money troubles or that kind of thing that we don't think of as ADHD.
Right.
Just
It's not
think
the
of as, yeah,
stereotype.
yeah.
Right. And so, I'd like to back up a little bit and talk about what ADHD is and isn't,
Please.
just
Yeah.
so that we have kind of a baseline.
Thank you.
When we talk about ADHD, we are talking about a spectrum of difficulties that are caused by developmental delays in the prefrontal cortex. It is a biomechanical, um, uh, a neurological thing. And there are a number of things that are not biological that can mimic ADHD.
Hmm.
And to be honest, every behavior in ADHD, the impulsivity, the memory, the regulation and activation issue, these are all very human things that all humans uh, experience.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
with ADHD, these are questions of severity, duration, and my goldfish brain just kicked in. Excellent. Um,
Impact.
yeah, the um, frequency,
There you go.
severity, duration, and frequency. I describe my ADHD as the world's smallest petting zoo. My goldfish brain can't remember, my hamster brain can't focus, and my terrier brain won't let go of the sock monkey. It's that hyper
Quite a
focus thing.
zoo.
It is, and that when we talk about ADHD, and by that we're talking about the developmental delay in the prefrontal cortex, that we process things differently because this is a difference in the prefrontal cortex. There are a couple things that go on. First of all, people ask, is it ADD or ADHD? And the current DMSV refers to it just as ADHD instead of now ADD and ADHD. But all they're saying is that they are acknowledging there is always a hyperactive component. It is just whether it is physical and external or internal and mental emotional. There
Mhm.
is always a hyperactive component. My ADHD is what would have been called primarily inattentive or that internal mental emotional ADHD.
Mhm.
So, along with ADHD, because of this, because we're talking prefrontal cortex differences, that you have a number of coexistent, what the medical field calls comorbidities, wonderful word, but the coexisting conditions of things like anxiety, depression, ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, OCD, all of these, a wide variety of things. And all that means is that your brain is unique and it is a series of strengths and challenges that are unique to you. And a diagnosis is just an acknowledgement of someone going, "Oh, I recognize that. That's this." And
Mhm.
your brain has no such limitation attached to it. It's going to be your brain. And
Mhm.
it's going to do wonderful and amazing and challenging and troubling things as brains do. So that's also why women very often can be misdiagnosed with ADHD as they see things like the anxiety
Mhm.
and that um, that is viewed as a thing in and of itself when it may just be an aspect of the presence of the ADHD.
Mhm.
As both a symptom and a coping mechanism.
Sure.
Yes.
Yes. Oh my goodness, yes. Because if you're trying to remember
Yes. You,
things,
I know that I always forget things, so I'm really busy making sure that I'm not always forgetting things, and that looks like anxiety to everybody else and feels like
yeah.
anxiety in my body. So I go to the doctor, and the doctor says what's wrong, and I tell him all these things, and he says, "I know what that is. That's anxiety. We're
Mhm.
fine. You
There,
just
I
need to
fixed
calm
it.
down."
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
And the other thing to realize here is that a diagnosis, I always say a diagnosis is just an indication of what kind of a pain you have been to a specific person at a specific time in
Yeah.
your life.
Yeah.
But a diagnosis first of all, if you need if you need medication or insurance, you need a diagnosis. If you are looking at programmatic eligibility educationally or accommodations, you may need a diagnosis. But a
Mhm.
diagnosis is an indication of the severity
Right.
of the impact
Mm-hmm.
to major life functions. So if you are coping really well, then you don't necessarily get a diagnosis because you're not broke,
Sure.
as
So,
the medical field would, want you.
Mm-hmm.
They,
so
they,
a woman may have grown up, coped in one way or another, raised the children, had the job,
Mm-hmm.
run the house,
Mm-hmm.
and then
And
suddenly not
that's
cope.
and
yes.
had those organic support
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
systems and
yeah,
come up with, and everything works.
Uh-huh. And
yeah.
that's why transition points all along the lifespan are where people tend to be diagnosed. So going from preschool to kindergarten, going from elementary school to middle school to high school to college. That those transition points put extra stress on our brain.
And the more stress we
Right.
have, the more ADHD we become.
Mm-hmm.
So with the drop in estrogen, the changes
Mm-hmm.
in hormones, the brain chemistry, the
Mm-hmm.
body
Life
chemistry.
changes
Yeah,
create
Yes.
stress.
that's
Mm-hmm.
huge when a woman starts into her menopause journey.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And
And she may be changing job at the same time. She may be getting divorced at the same time. She may be widowed at the same time.
yeah,
And those things will have been perhaps some organic supports that are suddenly gone.
mhm, mhm. So an older woman, um, whether she has a diagnosis or the label, uh,
And for the record, 85% of adults with ADHD are undiagnosed. So, you know, don't feel, certainly for my coaching, people ask, do you need to have a diagnosis? No, you do not. My job is to meet you where you are and to help you move forward and help you put some new tools in your toolbox. And that doesn't require a diagnosis. That requires listening and understanding where your brain is and what your challenges are and how we can speak your language so that it makes sense to you and so that there is accessibility and clarity so that you can move forward. And that's the difference between therapy and coaching.
that's,
Therapy
yeah,
is about healing your pain and making you okay with the was. And it is part of the medical model. It is about healing. Coaching is about where you want to go. As a coach, I am not going to treat you like you're broken. I am going to meet you where you are and help you realize your strengths. Now, coaching and therapy can work incredibly well together. If you need therapy, get therapy. But coaching is about finding new tools, learning how to use them, practicing with them, and becoming the agent of your own change and success.
mhm, mhm.
And my job is to help you through that journey. I am a companion on your journey. We can only be the hero of our own journey. We can only be either a companion or an obstacle on someone else's, and we get to choose who that is. And my job is to be a companion on people's journey and help them get where they want to go.
Mm-hmm.
So
Their agenda.
what would that what would that look like for a woman who might say, I've got this, I've got that, I need help, but coach me.
So one of the places we very often start with ADHD is in awareness, because ADHD, there's always the hyperactive component, racing thoughts or physical hyperactivity, and the movement, and so when our brain gets spun up, sometimes the hardest thing for us to do is to slow down. And it all starts with the pause. And it's very counterintuitive if, oh my God, I've got all these things, and that if I slow down and stop, I'll lose it all and I'll
That's
drop
life
everything.
right now. I mean,
Yeah,
it's the speed of
and
life.
and not only that, that ADHD brains have lower dopamine levels and fewer dopamine receptors. We are always looking for a source of dopamine. It's an interest-based brain.
Yep.
And so where neurotypical brains have that constant low level feed, they're getting the oil to the engine that's keeping things from burning up. We're always having, we go through a quart of oil with every tank of gas. That's the dopamine. And so part of what we start with is there is some education about what ADHD is and isn't, and what your ADHD is and isn't, because my ADHD is different than yours, different from someone else's, whether there's medication involved, whether there isn't, all of these things. And then we take a look at what is going on around you, and we take what you're doing right now. What are the challenges that are in front of you right this very moment? And we deal with those, and we use those as ways to create new tools. And so you are reducing the drama, you're reducing the stress, you are dealing with these things that are exploding and ramping things down and learning new skills. And it is not easy. It takes real work, but it's not a slog. I use stories and play as a big part of my coaching, because when we're dealing with our ADHD, we learn new skills and we have to practice those skills. In doing so with stories and reframing our stories and doing it in a state of play makes it much easier. It stimulates the interest, and it takes something on the order of like 400 repetitions to create a new neural pathway, but it takes something ridiculously low, like 20 or 30, if you're in a state of play. It's
Uh,
it's it's stunning. So let me give you an example of ADHD story reframing. And
yeah, yeah.
humans have kind of a negativity bias.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of our
We remember the
evolutionary protection. Yeah.
Right.
We want to know, are there predators around? That's how we grew up. That's how we
Where's the
evolved as a
snake
species.
hiding?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And when that snake comes out, the lizard brain goes, run now. The lizard brain can't think. So um, so we tend, as a species, as human critters, to have a negativity bias. Well, ADHD very much can do the this is spinal tap thing and crank it up to 11. And
Okay.
so we have sometimes a very extreme negativity bias. And when we don't have information, we will fill that in and we will make it worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, oh my God, I sent Tracy a text and why hasn't she responded? And, and then I must have made her mad. Yeah, I made her mad. I probably made her mad, and she's never going to speak to me. And oh my goodness, she's probably telling all her friends about, and I will start with, you didn't text me back, and it ends with the zombie apocalypse. Like we do this.
Meanwhile, I might have been driving, or
Yeah, exactly.
sorry.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get a hold of those things, we can't let go of them. The racing brain. And that's called rumination. And we ruminate and we play out all these scenarios. And how many times have you caught yourself rehearsing conversations you had 20, 30 years ago as though you could change them, and the inability to let go? So learning that, oh, our brains do these things, but the cool thing is they have names. They have names because other people have experienced them. Other people have experienced them, and other people have found solutions. And because other people have found solutions, we can find solutions too. When things have names, when you can name something, you can have power over it.
Well, we do tell, we're storytellers, right?
Yes,
Mhm.
yes, we
Um,
are. Is it Michael Gertner, I think, that said human beings are the only species that tell stories and then live by the stories we tell.
Mhm.
And so
ooh,
it is important for us to make sure that we tell ourselves stories that serve us. For a long time, I told myself the story, I'm always late because I have ADHD. I suck at being on time. And a little while back, I was late for something, and I sent emails out and apologized, and everyone says, "Yeah, no problem." And but I wasn't through beating myself up, and Andrea got real tired of that. And at one point, she kind of pulled me up and short and said, "Erik, when was the last time you blew something off this bad?" And I said, "No, I did what, like a month ago, because I'm always late." And she said, "No, it was 15 years ago when you were doing the program for Keith, and you were in Minneapolis, and you were supposed to be in Des Moines, and the calendar got messed up, and it was, yeah, I messed up pretty bad 15 years ago." And I wait, that can't be right. So I checked. I went back through. She was right. It was 15 years ago. But I'm always waiting for the shoe to drop. I'm in the trench fighting the battle, so I never see the progress.
where's the snake?
Yes, exactly. I'm always looking out for the snake. I know he's there. He's going to jump out because he
He's
did
gonna make me
once.
late.
And that I had always told myself the story, I'm always late. Well, looking at that, I had to construct a new story. And that new story was, I'm really good at being on time, but I have to pay attention to do it.
Mhm.
That's a story that serves me. That is a story that is accurate. That is a story based on evidence. That is a story that reminds me of my strengths.
And I want to amplify what he said here, that the previous story was based on what he felt.
Shame.
The new story was based on the evidence.
Yes.
And looking at that evidence, incorporating that into the new story can change how you feel.
Absolutely.
So
I
that what his feelings now around that aren't that, the shame of being late. It's the realization of this is something I have to pay attention to.
And
It's a different energy.
it did. And it also allowed me to say, yes, I was late. I screwed up. I own that.
Mm-hmm.
But this is not who I am. And it also explained to me why everyone was so quick to forgive, because I wasn't always late over and over and over and over and over. It's my story matched what everyone else saw, and we were talking the same
Mm-hmm.
language. And so I didn't have to feel shame. And there is so much shame around our feelings of failure and the cycle of failure that we often feel as ADHDers.
Mm-hmm.
And building that new success, building these are emergent stories that are new and fragile. And so it's important as we build them that we practice those stories and tell them, because the dominant stories of negativity we've told over and over. There are war stories, and we're good at telling them, and we revel in them because it's dopamine, because of reasons. But these new emergent stories are fragile, so we have to practice them until they have the strength to be a new dominant story.
I love this approach so much because only as I compare it to my experience of aging, and when I was in my mid 50s, kind of, and life was changing, and uh, I knew I had more time behind me than ahead of me, and going through those stories and thinking, was was that true? Was that ever true?
Mm-hmm.
And is it still true? And I think that re-examination and reframing and telling seeing opportunities for creating a news story going forward was life changing. And I can
Having the
imagine that,
compassion for yourself that you
yeah,
have for other people.
Mhm.
yes, I would imagine that 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 skill that and that you describe is just opens just a whole new world for people, and to be able to coach somebody along that path.
Well, and I have the best job in the world. I meet people and I get to introduce them to amazing people themselves.
Mhm.
And that because I'm a tourist, I see things that in your life that you stop seeing because it's boring.
Sure.
And so I see the interesting things and I can we use that as things to build upon and that ADHD is it changes. I mentioned it changes as we get older. The ADHD is really centered around executive function, the part of our brain that coordinates everything. Think of it like a music conductor. When everything works together, you get beautiful music. When everything doesn't, you get noise. And the executive function parts of the brain are problematic in ADHD brains. And so these control regulation, activation, and working memory. These are the challenges we have, and they present in a number of different ways.
And a little bigger picture, this is the area of our brain that matures the last
Yes.
for everyone. So, um, at about 25 is where neuroscientists think that that final maturity comes within executive function.
Right. But ADHDers can be up to 30% social emotionally delayed from their peers.
Oh, really?
So, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, someone who is 10 physically may present at 7.
Mhm.
And that the lessons we get in school at the age of 10, because a child may be presenting at functionally 7 years old, social emotionally, those lessons don't penetrate.
Right, because they're
They,
simply not ready for them.
You're not ready.
abstractly, they just don't make sense.
Yeah.
And then when that child is, say, 13 and the brain has matured and they go, wait, what was that thing? And the system has said, oh, wait, no, no, we learned that one back here. We're doing this now.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Lag
as,
time.
Right.
yes, and these are called ADHD skill gaps, and we have them. And what amazes me as an adult is the number of very interesting landmines those have created that I have discovered all through my life. That just these gaps, and so that's part of why examining all of this and creating tools is really important, is because of that social emotional delay and the skill gaps that it creates. I tell people that I'm 59, but I think like a 40-year-old, but it's okay because I read at a 70-year-old level, so it's all good.
I would imagine that when when people, women finally hear some of this being, well, the delays, the gaps, the challenges, and to be able, when you start connecting some dots,
Yes,
people
it
might say,
is it is
oh my
liberating, and
gosh.
it's Tracy, you are not broken. Your brain is doing the best it can at every moment to save your life. That is what it does. It is a unique mix of strengths and challenges, just like anyone else. It's just that our plate as ADHDers can be full of different things, just like anyone else. And that it's it requires specific tools and approaches. it would be like me taking your glasses away and saying, oh, you can read if you squint harder.
Mhm.
This is real. This causes very specific biochemical things in the brain. But there are things that we can do to deal with these. The external prompts for working memory
Mhm.
and uh, concentrating on process and not problems. I have I have a whole 30-minute webinar that when people are interested in coaching, um, I send them a link to a 30-minute webinar that I do that kind of explains how I work with ADHD. And then at the end of that webinar, they have an opportunity to schedule time on my calendar to talk about what they are dealing with. And my job at that point is not to sell them coaching. My job is to help them figure out what their next steps are. And if that is coaching with me, we will figure that out.
Mhm.
But it may not be coaching with me because, and I cannot stress this enough, if anyone listening takes nothing else away from this, you should never, ever do coaching with someone that you don't feel comfortable, connected, and safe with. The relationship you have with any professional that is doing session work is very important, and you have to be with the right one. Make sure that who you are dealing with understands ADHD or whatever it is that you are getting a coach for. Don't be afraid to ask about qualifications. Don't be afraid to ask about training. Don't be afraid to ask anything, because you need to make sure it's a good fit. And listen to that little hindbrain. And
Mhm.
if warning signals are flashing, just find something else, find someone else. Part of the reason I do coaching is because I'm a Midwest boy, and I was taught that if you're going to do something, if you're going to do a thing, you better be doing it yourself. So part of my coaching, part of being there for my clients, is it helps keep me connected and grounded for my own journey as an ADHDer.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that I'm very, very open about is my struggle, because it's real easy for me to sit here in this curated Zoom square in this lovely space I have put together and look, and look wonderful.
We did a webinar and got some pushback from people because you were showing what your office looked like. And the pushback was, that's not the office of an ADHDer, it's just too clean.
Yeah.
But what they didn't see was how long it took to make it an organized space. And the parts that are
And why it
unorganized,
is an organized space,
right,
because of the feelings, and because I heard David Suchet talk about Poirot, and when Poirot sees chaos, he feels chaos, and that resonated with me. Holy crap, that's why, all the piles, and I have piles, not files, and all of this, and that there was so much chaos that the noise in my brain took up space that I couldn't give to other things. And so to create more brain space, I started by clearing my desk, and everything else was a disaster buckle. And that desk, it got larger and larger and larger until I had this office space.
Mhm.
And that this is space that I very specifically take care of, because as goes the space, so goes my brain. And I have learned that. And this has taken me years to get to this point. I'm 59, and I have an extra special relationship with clutter that goes back, forever.
Yeah.
And just now I'm at a place where I need the quiet in my brain. I value the quiet more than I value the clutter. for the first time in my life. That was amazing.
If somebody connects the dots and says, I think I have undiagnosed ADHD and I'm 60 years old, I'm set in my ways. Is it ever too late?
No, I have clients. One of my clients, one of my favorite clients, she is 79,
I'm not sure how old she
74,
is.
but she has taken this journey and run with it, and has discovered things, and has whole new worlds have opened up to her that she never had access to before, and that she's able to be kind to herself and to say with confidence, this is who I am. And
You know, one of the things about women and our lifespan is that often it isn't until we hit that menopausal transition and until we retire that we do actually have the freedom that a lot of men have their entire lives
yes,
Yes.
to actually be ourselves. So a thing that is common for women is that is when you suddenly blossom.
Yeah.
You know, that we think of it as a time of winding down, and in many ways it's a time of stepping into a lot of power that you just didn't know you had.
That's what
or
I've,
weren't allowed to have.
Right.
That
Right.
finally you are giving time to yourself and having to give, instead of having to give it to a family or a husband. That you know, how many productivity systems do we see, especially in corporate America, that are fantastic for the white male who doesn't have to raise his own children?
right.
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 Right. This is a productivity system for someone who doesn't do his own laundry, cook his own food, clean his own house.
It doesn't
And
start a second shift when they get home.
Exactly.
yes, exactly. And so, you know, we women who reach a certain age, suddenly everything is changing. And on top of that, they suddenly have more time with themselves.
Mhm.
And there's things that now become apparent, or they can't hide from, or that they want to know more about, or any of a thousand different things. It just means your journey has changed. Your hero journey is going on a whole new wheel.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to quote Joseph Campbell, who said, the only question is whether you're ready to say a hearty yes to your adventure.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beauty of menopause in my mind. It's the start. It's the start. It is the start of a new adventure.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Some
I
cultures
love it.
call this time of life the second spring,
Yes.
Right.
and that's what you've
And
described.
how
And
glorious is that? Youth is wasted on the young. You
yeah,
know? And old age and treachery wins over youth and enthusiasm pretty much every time. So it's all good.
it is. It is. Are there? I know that you said. I think I heard you say that talk about hacks. Now, I I I realize that everybody's different and uh, and unique. But are there hacks to living?
Not in the way that most people think of
Mm-hmm.
hacks, because let's face it, if what I call a shelf help book or a YouTube video were going to fix everything, it would have by now anyway,
Yeah,
right?
well, yeah, it'd be a bestseller by now, you think?
Exactly.
There's some truisms, some commonalities about the way ADHD pattern brains operate that you can work with that may get labeled as hacks. So
Also,
we'll call them that.
if you come across something that suddenly speaks your language and it is suddenly accessible
Mm-hmm.
and it feels like a hack, I don't care. If
Mm-hmm.
it works, it works.
Okay.
But what I do know works is making sure that you are working with your brain instead of fighting it. I tell people that my job is to help them turn their ADHD into their biggest strength instead of their greatest struggle. You are going to be ADHD, but I feel sorry for people who are not ADHD because they don't make the kinds of amazing daily discoveries that I do.
You have a fast brain.
Yes, I do. Ned Hallowell describes ADHD as a race car brain with bicycle brakes.
Oh gosh.
Is it any wonder we wrap it around a tree a lot?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
So we have some information to leave people with so that they're not just hanging out here in the open thinking, do I have ADHD? Because we don't want people to be, this isn't a new problem for people to,
Yeah.
Right, right.
we're not trying to stoke new problems. If this has rung some bells for you, um, I would like for you to go to add.org. That is the website of ADA. Remind me what ADA stands
The
for.
the ADD Association, and
Right.
they deal specifically with adult ADHD and helping people that have suddenly realized what now.
Mm-hmm.
Chad is about children with ADHD. ADA is adult ADHD, and ADA has a number of resources and peer groups also. It is a great place to start. And they have their ADHD test. You can find it if you go to the
Mm-hmm.
website and do a search, but it's not official. It's not a diagnosis, but it can help you know what to begin to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And it may inform how you, or if you have a conversation with your doctor about it.
Right. The one that they have up specifically is the World Health Organization Adult Self-Report Scale. This is a validated instrument to as a screener for adult ADHD. So if you feel like you might have ADHD, you can take the screener. If you know you feel like you're scoring high, print it out, take it to your doctor, take
Uh-huh.
it to your therapist. If you're seeing a therapist, they can help you access the correct doctor for diagnosis if you feel like you need a diagnosis, or even just talk about it.
Sure.
Um, the other thing to know about ADA is that their membership is extremely affordable. It's $5 a month. For that $5 a month, you have access to 10 years worth of webinars.
Oh, wow.
Maybe not quite that long, but years and years and years.
Still,
And peer groups, support groups,
Mm-hmm.
if you are starting this journey, that is a great place to find your tribe.
Mm-hmm.
those are great resources. Sound like perfect resources for those who may want to just explore a little bit more.
Right.
It is all about exploring and finding out what works for you. And if you want to know more about my coaching, you can find out more at coachingforcreativebrains.com. Go to the site, drop me an email. You know, it's there is no wrong way to start the journey if you're starting the journey with curiosity and authenticity and truly wanting to discover who you are and who you can be and willing to explore.
Erik, Andrea, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I think, I hope that women who listen and their partners who may be listening are curious, may have some aha moments, and they realize that there's a whole nother path that that may open up for them.
Yeah.
In
My life when I got an ADHD diagnosis, suddenly a lot of things made sense. I have cerebral palsy. I walk differently. And all of my life, people said, "Oh, that's Erik. He walks funny." And that's all they ever looked at. And when I found out that I have ADHD, it was liberating. It was, oh, there's a reason. I'm not crazy. I'm not broken. I'm not the middle of the bell curve. And I choose to view that as a good thing.
May we all thrive in our uniqueness.
Exactly.
Yep. We're all unique, just like everyone else.
Thank you so much. I'm going to get that embroidered on a pillow.
Well, you can thank Garrison Keillor for that one.